In 2016, a man walked into a police station in Portland, Oregon, and said something that changed everything investigators thought they knew about one of America's most infamous robberies. He told them he knew who really pulled off the Cascade Casino heist, the $52 million job that had baffled the FBI for 3 years. He knew the names, he knew the plan, he knew where the money went. But here's what made his confession extraordinary. He wasn't confessing to being part of the crew. He was confessing to making someone disappear, permanently. Because that person had figured out something about the heist that was worth more than $52 million. Something so dangerous that the only solution was to erase him from existence. The detective who took his statement thought it was just another false confession. They get dozens of those for high-profile cases. People seeking attention, people with mental health issues, people trying to take credit for crimes they didn't commit. But then the man pulled out a photograph, and the detective's blood went cold. Because the person in that photograph had been missing for 3 years, vanished without a trace in the same week the Cascade Casino heist occurred. And until that moment, no one had connected the two events. This is the story of what really happened. The story of a heist that went perfectly, and the one member of the crew who saw something he shouldn't have seen, who understood something he shouldn't have understood, who became a liability so dangerous that his own team had to make him disappear. His name was Daniel Park. And this is the story of how knowing too much became a death sentence. Let me take you back to the beginning. To understand what happened to Daniel, you need to understand the heist itself. Because the Cascade Casino robbery wasn't just another theft. It was a masterpiece of planning, execution, and deception that took 2 years to orchestrate. The Cascade Casino sits on the Washington-Oregon border. It's one of the largest Native American casinos in the Pacific Northwest. On any given weekend, 20,000 people walk through its doors. They gamble, they drink, they lose money, and the casino counts every dollar. The casino's vault held the cash reserves for the entire operation, approximately $50 to $70 million at any given time, depending on the weekend. That money was supposed to be untouchable, protected by security systems that cost $12 million to install. But every system has weaknesses. Every security measure has gaps. And if you study something long enough, if you're patient enough, if you're smart enough, you can find a way through. That's what took 2 years, not planning the actual robbery. That part was relatively simple once they understood the system. The 2 years were spent studying, watching, learning every detail of how the casino operated. And the person who did most of that studying was Daniel Park. Daniel was 31 years old when the heist happened. He'd grown up in Seattle, studied mathematics at the University of Washington. He was brilliant with numbers, patterns, systems. He could look at complex operations and see inefficiencies that others missed. Daniel had worked as a data analyst for a logistics company before he got into trouble. He discovered that his employer was cooking the books, hiding losses, defrauding investors. Instead of reporting it, Daniel had tried to leverage what he knew into a better position. Blackmail, essentially, though Daniel thought of it as negotiation. It didn't work. He got fired, got blacklisted in his industry, and found himself unemployed with skills that weren't easily transferable to legitimate work. That's when he met Marcus Webb, and everything changed. Marcus was 48 years old, former casino security director at 3 major properties in Las Vegas. He understood casino security better than almost anyone in the country. He knew the systems, the protocols, the human factors that made security work or fail. Marcus had been fired from his last casino job for suspected involvement in an internal theft. Nothing was ever proven, but the casino didn't need proof to let him go. He'd left Vegas angry, bitter, and with a comprehensive knowledge of exactly how to beat the systems he'd once protected. Marcus and Daniel met at a poker game in Seattle, a small underground game where people who couldn't get credit at legitimate casinos came to play. Marcus noticed how Daniel counted cards, how he tracked probabilities, how his mathematical mind gave him an edge. After the game, Marcus bought Daniel a drink, started a conversation, and within an hour, Marcus knew he'd found someone with the exact skills he needed for something he'd been planning. "What do you know about casino security?" Marcus asked. "Not much," Daniel admitted. "Why?" "Because I'm putting together something big, something that requires someone who can analyze complex systems and find the weak points, someone who thinks in patterns and numbers." Daniel should have walked away, should have recognized what Marcus was really asking. But Daniel was broke, unemployed, and still angry about how his career had ended. So instead of walking away, he leaned forward. "Tell me more." Over the next 6 months, Marcus assembled his crew. He needed specialists, people with specific skills who could work together without ego conflicts or unnecessary risks. He recruited Sarah Chen, 35 years old, former Army combat engineer, expert in explosives, but more importantly, expert in controlled demolitions and breaching security barriers without triggering alarms. Sarah had left the military under circumstances she didn't discuss, but Marcus had connections who vouched for her skills and her discretion. He recruited James Kowalski, 42 years old, electronics specialist. If it had wires, circuits, or a computer chip, James could manipulate it. He'd done time for hacking into bank systems, and he'd learned from his mistakes. Now he was more sophisticated, and available for the right price. He recruited Nicole Martinez, 29 years old, con artist, social engineer, the person who could talk her way into or out of any situation. Nicole's talent was reading people, understanding what they wanted to hear and giving them exactly that. She'd run long cons on wealthy marks for years before Marcus found her. And he recruited Tommy Chen, Sarah's younger brother, 27 years old, driver, logistics, the person who could acquire vehicles, plan routes, and get people where they needed to be without being noticed or remembered. 5 people, each with specific skills, each with their own reasons for being willing to risk everything on one big score. But Marcus kept the team small for a reason. Every additional person increased the risk of someone talking, someone making a mistake, someone getting caught. 5 was the minimum they needed. 5 was the maximum he could trust. And then there was Daniel, the analyst, the person who would study the Cascade Casino until he understood every detail of its operation. Marcus gave Daniel a simple assignment: go to the casino, regularly, not as a tourist, as a student. Study the security, the procedures, the timing of cash deliveries, the shift changes, the human patterns that no security system could account for. Daniel became a regular at the Cascade Casino. He gambled modestly, lost small amounts, became a familiar face that security guards recognized but didn't worry about. Just another regular customer. But while he was playing blackjack or sitting at slot machines, Daniel was watching everything else. He noticed when armored trucks arrived with cash deliveries. He observed how many guards accompanied those deliveries, which doors they used, which hallways they walked through, how long the entire process took. He noticed the surveillance camera coverage, where the blind spots were, which angles the cameras couldn't see, which areas relied entirely on human guards rather than electronic monitoring. He noticed that the vault had a time lock system. It could only be opened during specific hours. But he also noticed that there was an emergency override, and that override required 2 people with specific key cards and a 10-digit code that changed daily. Most importantly, Daniel noticed the pattern in how the casino handled its cash reserves. Every Sunday night, after the weekend rush, the vault held its highest balance. Monday morning, an armored car service would arrive and transport most of that cash to regional banks. Sunday night, that was the target. Between midnight and 6 a.m., when the casino had its smallest crowd, its most tired security staff, and its vault holding between $50 and $70 million. Daniel spent 18 months gathering this information. 18 months of visiting the casino 3 to 4 times a week, gambling, watching, recording observations in a coded notebook that looked like gambling strategies. He created spreadsheets tracking every variable: guard rotations, camera coverage, cash delivery schedules, shift patterns. He mapped the entire casino, every hallway, every exit, every security checkpoint.
And then he found something Marcus hadn't asked him to look for. something that changed everything. Daniel noticed an anomaly in the casino's cash handling procedures. The amounts being transported by armored cars didn't quite match the amounts that should have been in the vault based on the casino's reported revenue. At first, he thought he'd made a calculation error, but he checked and rechecked his numbers. The discrepancy was real, small, but consistent. Approximately 2 to 3% of the casino's cash was disappearing before it ever reached the banks. Someone inside the casino was skimming. Not a lot, just enough that it wouldn't trigger immediate audits. But over time, that 2 to 3% added up to millions. Daniel told Marcus about the discrepancy. He thought it was relevant to their planning. Maybe it meant security was compromised. Maybe it meant they could exploit whoever was already stealing. Marcus listened carefully, asked detailed questions, and then told Daniel to forget about it. That's not our concern. We're here to rob the vault, not investigate casino fraud. Focus on the security systems and forget about the rest. Daniel should have listened, should have followed Marcus's instructions and forgotten about the discrepancy. But Daniel's analytical mind couldn't let it go. He kept thinking about it, kept wondering who was skimming, kept trying to figure out the pattern, and eventually he figured it out. The person skimming from the casino was Marcus himself. Well, not directly, but Marcus had connections inside the casino, people he'd worked with in Vegas who'd moved to other properties, people who owed him favors, people who were part of a network that had been skimming from casinos for years. The Cascade Casino heist wasn't just about stealing $50 million in one night. It was about covering up years of systematic theft. When the vault was robbed, investigators would focus on the big heist. They wouldn't look too carefully at the smaller discrepancies that have been happening for years. The theft would reset the books, make the skimming disappear into the larger crime. Daniel realized this about 6 months before the planned heist, and he made a critical mistake. He confronted Marcus about it. They met at a diner in Portland. Daniel laid out what he'd discovered, the pattern of skimming, the connections Marcus had inside the casino, the real reason Marcus wanted to rob the Cascade. Marcus listened quietly, didn't deny anything, just sat there, drinking coffee, watching Daniel explain how he'd figured it all out. When Daniel finished, Marcus asked a simple question. "Have you told anyone else about this?" "No, I wanted to talk to you first. I figured we could use this somehow, maybe get a bigger cut since we're helping you cover up the skimming operation." Marcus smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who just realized they had a problem. "Daniel, I like you. You're smart, you're thorough, you're exactly what this job needed. But you've just created a situation that I can't allow to exist." Daniel's expression changed, fear replacing confidence. "What do you mean?" "I mean you know too much. You've connected things that should never be connected. And now I have to decide what to do about that." Daniel tried to backtrack, tried to convince Marcus that he'd keep quiet, that he'd never tell anyone, that knowing about the skimming didn't change anything. But Marcus knew better. Knowledge like that was too dangerous. Daniel might keep quiet now, but what about after the heist? What if he got caught? What if he decided to negotiate with prosecutors by giving them information about a larger criminal enterprise? The Cascade Casino heist was one job. The skimming operation was worth tens of millions over time. Marcus couldn't risk that for one person's conscience or fear or ambition. That meeting in the Portland diner was the beginning of the end for Daniel Park. He just didn't know it yet. The planning continued for the next 6 months. Daniel kept working on the security analysis. Marcus acted like everything was normal. The crew prepared for the heist. But Marcus was also making other plans. Plans for what would happen to Daniel after the job was done. The heist itself went perfectly. Sunday night, March 12, 2013. Everything Daniel had predicted, Marcus had planned, and the crew had rehearsed came together flawlessly. James disabled the security systems, Sarah breached the vault door, Nicole's social engineering had gotten them the key cards they needed. Tommy had vehicles positioned at 3 different locations for the escape. They entered the casino at 2:47 a.m. through a service entrance that Daniel had identified. They moved through corridors that security cameras couldn't see. They reached the vault at 3:15 a.m. The emergency override worked exactly as Daniel had predicted. The vault opened. Inside was approximately $52 million in cash. They loaded it into rolling equipment carts that looked like they belonged to the casino's maintenance department, moved back through the corridors, exited through the same service entrance. By 4:30 a.m., they were driving away in a nondescript panel van. The casino wouldn't realize they'd been robbed for another 3 hours. Perfect execution. $52 million. Split 5 ways was more than $10 million each. The crew drove to a warehouse in Seattle that Marcus had rented 6 months earlier. The plan was to count the money, store it temporarily, then split up and launder their shares slowly over the next few years. They arrived at the warehouse at 6:15 a.m., unloaded the carts, started counting the cash. Daniel was exhausted but exhilarated. They'd actually done it, pulled off one of the biggest casino heists in history. He was thinking about what he'd do with $10 million, how he'd disappear, start over somewhere new. He wasn't paying attention to Marcus, wasn't noticing the tension in the way Marcus watched him, wasn't seeing the silent communication between Marcus and Sarah. They finished counting at 8:30 a.m., $52,300,000, more than they'd hoped for. Marcus suggested they all get some sleep. They'd been up for over 24 hours. They were making mistakes in their counting. Better to rest than divide the money when they're thinking clearly. Everyone agreed. There was sleeping arrangements in the warehouse, cots in a back room. They could sleep in shifts with someone always watching the money. Daniel volunteered to take the first watch. He was too wired to sleep anyway. The adrenaline was still coursing through him. The others went to the back room. Daniel sat with the money, still processing what they'd accomplished, still thinking about his new future. He didn't hear Sarah come back, didn't hear her approaching from behind, didn't know anything was wrong until he felt the needle slide into his neck. The sedative worked fast. Daniel tried to stand, tried to turn around, but his legs wouldn't work. His vision blurred. He collapsed onto the floor, consciousness fading. When he woke up, he was in a different location, a cabin somewhere remote. He could tell it was remote because there were no sounds of traffic, no ambient noise from civilization, just silence and forest. His hands were tied, his head throbbed from whatever drug they'd used, and Marcus was sitting across from him, watching. "You're awake. Good. We need to have a conversation." Daniel's mind raced, trying to understand what was happening. Why was he tied up? Where were the others? What had gone wrong? "Daniel, what is this? What's going on?" "This is about the conversation we had 6 months ago, about the things you know, about the problem you represent." Fear flooded through Daniel. He'd thought Marcus had forgotten about that, thought we'd moved past it. "I haven't told anyone, I swear. I kept my mouth shut, just like I said I would." "I know you did. You kept your word, but that doesn't change the fundamental problem. You still know, and as long as you know, you're a liability." "Marcus, please. We just pulled off the biggest score of our lives. $10 million each. We can all disappear. I'll go to another country. You'll never hear from me again."
Marcus shook his head sadly. "It's not that simple, Daniel. You figured out the skimming operation. You connected me to people inside the casino. You understand how the whole system works. That knowledge is dangerous. Not just to me, but to a network of people who've been running this operation for 15 years across multiple casinos. I won't say anything, I promise. I'll take my share and disappear. You'll never see me again. Promises aren't enough. I can't build the rest of my life on trust that you'll keep quiet when you inevitably get caught for something else. When prosecutors offer you a deal, When you're facing 20 years and all you have to do is give them information about a larger criminal enterprise. Daniel realized what was happening, what Marcus was really saying, and terror replaced fear. "You're going to kill me!" "No, I'm going to make you disappear. There's a difference." Marcus explained what was going to happen. Daniel's identity would be erased. His apartment would be cleaned out. His car would be found abandoned near the Canadian border, suggesting he'd fled the country. His family would report him missing. Police would investigate, and they'd find nothing. Because Daniel wouldn't be dead, not officially. He'd just cease to exist. "There's a place," Marcus said, "remote, isolated, where people go when they need to disappear permanently. You'll be taken there. You'll live there, but you'll never leave. You'll never contact anyone from your old life. You'll never be Daniel Park again." "That's insane! You can't just make someone disappear in modern society. People will look for me." "People will look, and they'll find nothing. Because you'll be somewhere that doesn't officially exist. Somewhere that people who know too much go to spend the rest of their lives in comfortable imprisonment." Daniel didn't believe him. It sounded like something from a movie, a paranoid fantasy. But the way Marcus said it with absolute certainty made Daniel wonder if it was real. Over the next 3 days, Daniel learned it was very real. The compound Marcus described was a compound in rural Alaska, approximately 40 acres of land owned through shell corporations, surrounded by wilderness, accessible only by helicopter or a hiking trail that took 3 days to navigate. In that compound lived 11 other people. All of them, like Daniel, had known too much about something. All of them had been too dangerous to kill, but too risky to let free. So they'd been brought here, to live out their lives in comfortable exile. The compound had housing, food, electricity from generators and solar panels, internet access, but heavily monitored and restricted. Books, movies, entertainment, everything someone would need for a comfortable life, except the one thing that mattered most: freedom. Daniel spent 3 years in the compound, 3 years of comfortable imprisonment, 3 years of wondering if he'd ever see his family again, 3 years of regret for confronting Marcus, for not just keeping his mouth shut and taking his share of the heist money. But Daniel never stopped being an analyst, never stopped looking for patterns, never stopped trying to figure out how the system worked. He studied the compound, the routines of the guards who brought supplies, the schedule of helicopter visits, the security protocols, and slowly, over 3 years, he began to understand the vulnerabilities. The compound's biggest weakness wasn't its security, it was its isolation, because the people running it assumed that even if someone escaped the compound itself, they'd never survive the 3-day hike through Alaskan wilderness to reach civilization. But Daniel had been studying the maps, learning the terrain, understanding the route, and he'd been preparing himself physically, building strength, building endurance. In September 2016, Daniel made his move. He waited for a supply delivery day, waited for the moment when guards were distracted loading supplies, and he ran. He had a backpack with food, water, a compass, and stolen maps. He had warm clothing, and he had 3 years of planning telling him exactly which direction to go. The 3-day hike took him 5 days. He got lost twice, nearly died from hypothermia once. But his mathematical mind kept him on track, kept him calculating angles and distances and probabilities. On the 5th day, he emerged from the wilderness near a small town in Alaska. He was exhausted, half-starved, and hypothermic, but he was free. Daniel walked into the local police station. He told them his name, told them he'd been missing for 3 years, told them he needed to speak with the FBI immediately. The local police were skeptical. Missing persons don't usually just walk out of the woods after 3 years. But they contacted the FBI anyway. And when agents verified that Daniel Park was indeed a legitimate missing person from 2013, suddenly everyone was very interested in his story. Daniel told them everything: the compound, the other residents, the location, how he'd escaped. But he didn't tell them about the Cascade Casino heist. That part he kept to himself, because revealing that would mean admitting his own crimes, and Daniel wanted freedom, not a prison cell. The FBI raided the compound 3 days later, heavily armed, expecting resistance. They found 11 residents and 3 guards who surrendered without fighting. The residents were freed, returned to their families, given new identities, and placed in protective custody. The story made national news. A secret prison where people who knew too much were kept in comfortable exile. It was unprecedented, shocking, and it raised questions about who was really behind it. The investigation led to Marcus Webb. Eventually, it took months of following the trail of shell corporations and encrypted communications, but investigators connected him to the compound, connected him to other disappearances, connected him to a network that had been operating for over 20 years. Marcus was arrested in 2017, so were 15 other people involved in running the network. The whole operation was dismantled, exposed, destroyed. But here's what the public never learned. Here's what the FBI kept quiet because revealing it would compromise their investigation. Marcus never went to trial for the Cascade Casino heist. Despite Daniel's testimony, despite the timing of Daniel's disappearance matching the robbery, despite all the circumstantial evidence, because the money from the Cascade Casino heist was never recovered, and prosecutors couldn't prove Marcus's connection to the robbery without the money. Daniel kept that secret, kept his own involvement hidden, accepted his new identity in protective custody, and never told anyone that he was part of the crew that stole $52 million. The other crew members, they disappeared successfully. Sarah, James, Nicole, and Tommy all vanished with their shares, living quiet lives under new identities, never spending too much, never attracting attention. The Cascade Casino heist remains officially unsolved. The FBI knows more than they're telling, but without evidence, without the money, without witnesses willing to testify, they can't prosecute. Daniel lives somewhere in the American Southwest now. New name, new identity, new life. He works as a data analyst for a small company, uses his mathematical skills for legitimate purposes.
He thinks about those 3 years in the compound constantly. Thinks about the other people who are imprisoned there. Thinks about the knowledge that made him too dangerous to be free. He learned something during those 3 years, something that keeps him awake at night, even now, years later, living safely under his new identity. The compound in Alaska wasn't the only one. Marcus's network operated at least 3 other facilities in different countries. The FBI only found one of them. The others are still operational, still housing people who know too much, still run by networks that the FBI hasn't identified. Daniel knows this because he overheard conversations during his time there, overheard references to other facilities, other residents, other networks. He told the FBI what he knew, but without locations, without specific information, there was nothing they could do. Just the knowledge that somewhere, right now, there are people living in comfortable exile, prisoners of their own knowledge, too dangerous to kill, too risky to free. Daniel thinks about them sometimes, wonders how many people have disappeared for knowing too much, how many families have missing loved ones who are actually alive, but imprisoned in places that don't officially exist. He thinks about the 11 people he lived with in the Alaska compound. Most of them were released and given new identities like him. But 2 of them refused to leave, refused protective custody, refused new identities. They'd spent so long in the compound, adapted so completely to that life, that freedom was more terrifying than imprisonment. They chose to stay,
living in the compound voluntarily now, with security instead of guards, with the option to leave but no desire to exercise it. That haunts Daniel more than anything else. The idea that imprisonment can become so normal, so comfortable, that freedom becomes unbearable. The Cascade Casino rebuilt its security after the heist, spent $20 million on new systems, new protocols, new protections. They've never been robbed again. But they still don't know who robbed them the first time. Still don't know where the $52 million went. Still don't know that one of the thieves spent 3 years imprisoned in Alaska for knowing too much. Daniel's family knows he's alive now. The FBI arranged a reunion after his rescue, but it was brief and supervised. His family thinks he was kidnapped by people involved in corporate espionage, held prisoner for years, and finally escaped. They don't know the truth. They can't know. Because the truth would expose Daniel's role in the heist, would make him a criminal instead of a victim. So Daniel lives with the secret, lives with the knowledge of what he did, lives with the guilt of stealing $52 million and the trauma of being imprisoned for it. He'll never spend his share of the money. It's hidden somewhere he can never access without revealing his identity. $10 million that might as well not exist. Was it worth it? That's the question Daniel asks himself every day. Was $10 million worth 3 years of imprisonment? Worth losing his identity? Worth living the rest of his life looking over his shoulder? He knows the answer, but admitting it means admitting that Marcus was right, that some knowledge is too dangerous to possess, that sometimes knowing too much really is a death sentence, even if you survive it. The heist was perfect, the execution flawless, the escape successful. But the price Daniel paid for that success was higher than any amount of money could justify. He knew too much, and in the world of professional crime, in the world of secrets and networks and operations that span decades, knowing too much means you can't be allowed to exist. Not as yourself, not with your identity intact, not with your freedom. Marcus is in prison now, serving multiple life sentences for kidnapping, false imprisonment, and operating a criminal enterprise. He'll never be free again, but he still won't talk about the Cascade Casino heist, won't name his accomplices, won't reveal where the money went, because talking means betraying the network. And the network is bigger than Marcus, bigger than any one person. Daniel understands that now, understands that he was never fighting Marcus. He was fighting a system, a network of people who'd been operating for decades, who had resources and connections that stretched across continents. He escaped the compound, but he'll never escape what he knows, never escape the knowledge that made him too dangerous to be free. That's the real prison, not the compound in Alaska, not the 3 years of comfortable exile, but the knowledge itself. The understanding that some information is so dangerous that possessing it changes you fundamentally, makes you a different person, makes your old life impossible to return to. Daniel Park pulled off one of the biggest heists in American history, and he paid for it by disappearing. Not forever, as Marcus intended, but close enough. He exists now in a liminal space, not quite free, not quite imprisoned, living under a false identity with memories he can't share and knowledge he can't reveal. He knew too much, and that knowledge cost him everything that mattered. His identity, his family, his life as Daniel Park. The person who walked out of that Alaskan wilderness in 2016 looked like Daniel Park, but he wasn't. Not really. That person died in a warehouse in Seattle when Marcus decided he was too dangerous to exist. What walked out was someone new, someone shaped by 3 years of imprisonment, someone who understood that in the world of high-level crime, the biggest risk isn't getting caught, it's knowing too much. And that's a lesson Daniel Park learned the hard way, a lesson he'll carry for the rest of his life, however long that life lasts, whoever he has to pretend to be to live it. He knew too much, and he had to disappear forever. The fact that he managed to come back doesn't change the fundamental truth. The person he was is gone, disappeared as completely as if he'd never existed. And somewhere, in compounds that the FBI hasn't found, in networks that still operate, there are others like him. People who knew too much. people who disappeared, people who might never come back. That's the real story. Not the heist, not the $52 million, but what happens when you know something you shouldn't, when you see something you can't unsee, when you become too dangerous to exist as yourself. Daniel Park learned that lesson, survived it, barely. But he'll never be free of it, because some knowledge once gained can never be forgotten. And some prisons exist not behind walls, but inside your own mind. He knew too much, and he disappeared forever. Even if his body came back, the person he was never did. The part that knew too much, that part died in Alaska, and it's never coming back. That's the price of knowledge in a world where secrets are more valuable than money. And that's why somewhere right now, someone else who knows too much is learning the same lesson Daniel learned, is being taken to a place they'll never leave, is disappearing forever. The networks still exist, the compounds still operate. The system that imprisoned Daniel is still running, just more carefully now, more secretly. And Daniel knows this, lives with this knowledge every day, knows that he escaped one prison only to live in another. The prison of knowing, the prison of understanding, the prison of being the person who knew too much and survived to remember it. That's his life now. That's his forever. He disappeared, and even though he came back, part of him never did. The part that knew too much. That part died in Alaska, and it's never coming back.